What up, y'all? It's Jeff. I'm here with a previous student. Do you want to say your name?
Oh, I'm Clark Huang
Yeah, I met
from Purdue
Clark last
College.
year. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm from Purdue College. I was like a comp sci student there, and I took like Math 2B with Jeff. That's how I met him, and I like him a lot. So
Yeah, we worked together last spring, I think. Spring.
yeah. That's like a few months ago. And I was
Awesome.
transferred to Davis, still like studying comp sci. And yeah, the experience like helped me a lot.
Yeah, you're amazing. I remember that you worked quite hard and you listened carefully and you tried new things. I feel so blessed because about a week ago, I got an email from you and then we've been texting back and forth. Do you want to talk a little bit about the context of this project, just so kind of viewers
Yeah,
understand what you're doing?
yeah. So I have like a journalism project that I'm like doing for my class that I want to talk about the education system. So I just feel like that Jeff can be like a perfect candidate for my project. So that's why I reached out.
I hope that I give you what you're looking for and support your work.
Yeah,
I
you
think
sure
it's
you will.
important that we reimagine college education and that we really make this
Mhm.
valuable for students like you. So with that, I'm going to let you take over the mic, and I will do the best that I can to answer your questions.
Hi, okay. So for my project, can you please introduce yourself again?
Sure.
Like your occupation, yeah, your name.
Awesome. My name is Jeff Anderson. I am currently a full professor of mathematics at Foothill College in Los Altos Hills, California, where the poor work and the rich live. I I grew up in Redwood City. I went to UC Santa Barbara for my undergraduate and UC Davis for my graduate. So I got a BS from UC Santa Barbara in math, and then an
Mhm.
MA and a PhD in mathematics from UC Davis. And then in 2013, I started my job here, and I've been teaching ever since. And this is a dream come true for me. I get to work with amazing students like Clark and really invest in
Thanks.
you. That's something that makes me very happy.
I see. Okay, so the first question would be, why did you choose to be a community college professor? Why do you like this job and do you enjoy it so far?
Those are great questions. I chose to be a community college teacher because of a strong feelings that I would now call anti-racism and also empowering the youth. I am very concerned with income inequality, climate change, and racism in the United States. And when I was going through my math career, I was being groomed to be a mathematician at places like Google, or try to be a mathematician at a place like UC Berkeley or UCLA or UC Davis, where you go into academia. And while I loved mathematics, I felt very strongly that the way we teach math is very harmful for students.
Mhm.
And when I was considering my job options, I thought a lot about the idea that we need very dedicated and thoughtful professionals to solve problems in math education. And so I have a longer story about how I navigated the academic job search and thinking about that and really wrestling
I
with that.
see.
It was actually
Yeah.
outside the context of the math department. So as a graduate student, many mathematicians don't take graduate students seriously who think about teaching.
Yeah. I
A
see.
lot of my reflections were done privately, but yeah, the short answer to your question is that I really wanted to spend my career, you could say, revolutionizing math education, doing stuff very, very differently than was done to me.
I see.
And when I thought about where I wanted to do that, I wanted a place where privilege was not often given. So community colleges are not,
Mhm. Yeah.
the standard idea is like community colleges are on the bottom,
Yeah.
CSUs and UCs and private institutions. I call those income inequality entrenched institutions, because those institutions,
Mhm.
when you put institutions like Stanford at the top, those are hoarding resources and privilege for the most
Yeah.
society. I actually have what I call teaching or learning friendly hierarchy, and community colleges are at the top of that hierarchy. So it
I
goes community
see. Yeah.
colleges, state schools, and then UCs, and Stanford is at the bottom of that hierarchy. And that has to do, I would ask you, what did you notice about the amount of face-to-face contact you had with me
Yeah,
versus?
I feel that a lot. Yeah, since I get it, you see like a lot of professors don't have like interaction with students because they also have like researches and stuff to do. And some of them like have like hundreds of students to teach in a single classroom. So yeah.
Yeah, and so I thought very deeply about that when I was thinking
Yeah.
about where I wanted to make my impact. I thought a lot about the idea that I wanted to be on the ground with students, developing
Mhm. Yeah, I
relationships.
feel that.
And I also wanted, I believe that college education should be free in the United States. I think that we should fund college education, and I have some really strong feelings about why. My joke about this is my undergraduate and graduate cost about $300,000 combined. And I think in the first 10 years of my career, I've already paid $300,000 in taxes. So if you look at what the cost of the government is,
I see.
30 years of my career is money in the bank, right? So when I'm thinking about why community colleges versus a CSU or UC, students at community colleges pay the least price institutions, and I wanted to provide the best educational resources and experiences for students that have to pay $0. And then the other thing is that there's no barrier to entry. So to get into the UCs, you have these barriers to entry. So not all students are places. My favorite quote about community college is we teach the top 100% of students.
Right? I see. So all the students.
So, and I love that. I love the idea of welcoming all students from all backgrounds in, and I think it's so important. In fact, you can see, this is something that I'm wearing today for another event, but it says, it's Fredrick.
I see.
Once you learn to read, you will always be free. And I feel the same way. If we're serious about addressing income inequality and climate change and institutional racism, college education has to be a big part of that. And the more people we welcome into this space, the better. And so when I was planning my career, I targeted an institution where all students would be welcome, and I could give them a really, really the best experience that I possibly can with minimum barrier to entry. Yeah.
I see. Okay, thanks. Yeah, I had like some great experience in Purdue too. Yeah, comparing to like the class I'm taking, I feel like I have like pretty decent education there.
Yeah, I would ask. This is your interview, but I can't help but say, because many students come into Foothill thinking community college is less than the UCs, and then it's not until they get to the UCs in 4 years.
Yeah, actually feel like what the UC is like.
Yeah, and then you can reflect for yourself, right? What do you notice when you compare the experiences that you had at Foothill versus what you see at a UC system, right?
Yeah, I would say a lot of my friends in the UC don't actually also like the UC that much too, though. So I do enjoy my life, like my time in the community college, though.
Yeah, and there's I forgive the UCs for that. I think they're doing the best they can in a system.
Yeah.
Harmful, right? Like, it's not fair to put hundreds of students under one professor. It's not fair that professors don't get celebrated for doing teaching as much as they do for research. It's not fair that we create competition. So there's some systemic pressures on UC professors that make good teaching hard, but still we don't advertise those. We say that when you go to the UCs, you're going to get a great education. But what happens is that many students feel isolated, they feel alone, they don't develop relationships, and the burden of that is placed onto the student. And one of the things I love most about community colleges is that we don't have those pressures. So 100% of my life, I can channel my energy into my students, right? And really invest in you and really develop relationships with you.
I see. Okay, thanks. So next question is, so since you're like very like unsatisfied with like a traditional type of teaching, so what's your like education policy right now? How is that really like different from traditional type, and how does that work so far?
Oh, this is a great question. So I'm going to give you the short answer to that question, and then some resources that I think about on that short answer. I better be a little careful here. So I think a visual is useful in this case. Can you see this screen with the mouse?
Yeah, I can see it.
So there's a talk that I gave many years ago that outlines this decently. And this is kind of my philosophy of teaching. Let me see if I can find Jeff Anderson's. I think a lot about the idea that traditional education is not designed for individualized learning. It's designed. It's designed to minimize cost to society, and those are different problems. There's a great book, Grading for Equity, that talks about some of the history of the grading process and all this. But when I think about my job as a teacher, I think a lot about the idea that my job is to help you learn. So first and foremost, if you're not learning, I'm not teaching. So I don't define teaching as me talking to you. I define teaching as creating an environment that encourages and inspires you to do some deep learning. And so one of the questions is, well, what is learning, right? And I have a whole definition of this. You've read some of my blog posts on this. I define learning as a process that leads to changes in knowledge, beliefs, behaviors. So in other words, it's a process. It has to happen over time, and it
Mhm.
has to involve change. So when I'm working with students, I'm not looking for results on a timed test, because I actually think those do not measure
Mhm.
emotion at
Yeah.
all. I think those are measurements of privilege. I'm looking for changes in how you think, changes in how you act, changes in how you behave, right? And the knowledge that you build. And my hope is always that we can co-create an experience where you're developing skills today that will help you in the future. And I talk a lot about my students with that, right? I talk about
Mhm.
the idea that,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And so if I think about that, so once I get to the idea that if you're not learning, no teaching is happening, period.
yeah. Mhm.
So
I
in other
see.
words, yeah. So the next thing is, well, how do you help students learn, right? What is it that you do? And so from that standpoint, I developed this thing that I call like a hierarchy of learning needs. So, in math,
Mhm.
we have this thing called, um, oh, I think this is the wrong one. Sorry. So it must be electrify the linear systems, of course. So in math, we have this thing called PEMDAS, right? And PEMDAS is this idea that you first,
Oh, I see. Uh-huh.
it's a hierarchy of operations. So first you do parentheses, then you do exponents, then you do multiplication. And the idea
Mhm.
is it just helps us as mathematicians, when we're solving a problem,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
both of us converge on the same idea at the same time, right?
Mhm.
So I actually think a lot about the need for an equivalent hierarchy in learning, and this is what I call my learning needs hierarchy. So,
Mhm.
I can talk about how I developed this, but the idea is that I think that the traditional approach to education that happens in most colleges is just help students with the content.
Mhm.
And they're going to,
Mhm.
as long as you
Mhm.
give them the content, they'll be successful. And I think this is this leads, when teachers believe this is true, it leads us to underperform, right? We don't actually do what we need
Yeah.
with students, because I can give you tons of content, and it won't
Mhm.
actually, and then you go on in your life and you're going to need new content, and you're going to need new ideas and new skills, right?
Mhm.
In other words, content doesn't help students solve problems that are important for the long run, because if we're serious about lifelong learning, no matter how much
Yeah.
content I give you, you're always going to have to learn more in the future. So I call this like the industrial age version of education, like just throw more content on them and they'll be
Yeah. Uh-huh.
and it also goes back to like the 1600s, right? If if the only person that has access to knowledge is Newton, and you have to get on a horse and ride 400 miles to see Newton,
Mhm.
then it is actually in the interest of Newton and you that he gives you content when you see him, right? But
Mhm. Mhm.
we're no longer living in that age. Students have access to more content
I
than I
see.
can
Uh-huh.
ever give them, right? And so if that's all I'm doing for them, I am not actually helping them learn in deep ways. And so what I like to say is, when I think about the learning needs hierarchy, one of the most important things that I can do, in fact, the most important thing that I can do, is help my students develop belief and
I
hope
see.
for
Uh-huh.
themselves. So I always like to say, I know I can do whatever I want to do. So you create a vision for your future that you believe can be true. And then
Uh-huh.
I would actually call this purpose and goals. So the next most important thing is I can help you develop your purpose. So you have an imagination of what you think is capable, what you think you're possible of. Then you design a purpose and some goals for yourself that allow you to take ownership of why you think that imagined reality is important, right? So that's not some other person, some authority figure telling you what you need to do, but
I
it's that
see.
you take ownership.
You
This is
think
important
you
for my,
can do. Uh,
yeah, it's important for my family, it's important for the community. I believe in these problems, right? Then the next one down is becoming a strategic deep learner. So helping you develop really sophisticated
mhm.
meta learning skills, so that you can teach yourself
Uh-huh.
any knowledge that you have that you need, right? Like literally, you know how to learn, you know how to read books, you know how to think, you know how to
Mhm.
create concepts, right? And my claim is, I actually believe this, that as a teacher, if I can help my students do these three things, they don't even need me. They don't even need
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
all we got to do. If you know what you want to do in your life, and you have really deep-seated purposes, you have an imagination of what you want to achieve, it ties
Uh-huh.
to so many pieces of your identity, the love that you have for your family, the all these things, and then you know how to learn anything. All I have to
Mhm.
do is give you a textbook, and you'll pick up any knowledge that you need, right? In
I
other
see.
words,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
when I think about when I'm teaching students, my job, a lot of math teachers think, if they were a swimming coach, that the math
Uh,
techniques are the strokes, right? So they're like, if I just teach them this math techniques, I'm teaching them how to swim. In my career, I don't think that way. I think that the strokes are the habits of learning and thought, and the math is the water. So the math is the water where we train you how to become a very sophisticated learner, and that we tap into your purpose and your belief systems so that you are creating the life that you want and using your learning skills to do so. And so when I think about my job as a teacher, 100% of my time in the classroom is designed for that. And that's why I've done all the videos and all that stuff, because what that does is it outsources the direct instruction process and gives you a lot of creative time. And then when we work together individually, we can start to get to know each other, and I can start to see where you're at in these processes and then give you targeted ideas to develop yourself further in this, right? And so that's kind of my teaching philosophy at a low level. Every one of these things has multiple, probably 15 to 30 different books that feed into why I make these decisions and how I make these decisions, et cetera. But that's a high level version of how I think about myself as a teacher.
Yeah, I see. Okay. I think this should be enough for this one. And so the next question will be, what do you think the relationship between students and teachers should be? Like, how do you think like this kind of relationship will affect the teaching quality?
Well, yeah. So I think relationships are really key I think without relationships, we have nothing. A lot of the systems that we have in education place power in the hands of the teacher, and then the student is supposed to be subservient to that, right? So teacher going to student. I like to say that this is a mechanism to entrench oppression. There's, when students cannot, this is related to the book Pedagogy of the Oppressed and the idea of a banking system of education, where the idea of education is that a student comes in knowing nothing and the teacher fills that student up with their knowledge. But if you think about that, that's the teacher projecting ignorance onto the student. But they're not. Yeah. And so there's another version that he talks about, Paulo Freire in that book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. He talks about the dialogic praxis where both, traditional teacher is actually also a learner, and then student is also a teacher. So instead of a hierarchy, you actually have, you might say there is
the equal position.
Yes, you are a teacher. I am a learner. I am a teacher. You are a learner. And in fact, one of the things that I'm thinking about in this moment is like when I worked with you, Clark, one of the things that you taught me in our session together was how important it is. I think it was probably like weeks 4 or 6, we were having our individual meeting, and we were talking about challenging traditional structures in education, right? Challenging the idea that the reason that we do work is for the teacher versus for ourselves, right? Do you remember this conversation?
Yeah.
And I remember you having an epiphany, like, oh my God, I can do work for myself. I can take ownership over that. And in that moment,
it's like that the students work and think for themselves, not like for other people.
Right. Yes. And that, this is one of the reasons that I feel so strongly about ungrading. And I remember that moment because at that moment you were my teacher. You were teaching me. I didn't say that, but I listened really carefully to what you were saying. And I remember thinking to myself, how important is this, that we have these conversations together, and that students are able to get to that space for themselves. And then it was another reminder of those type of dialogues and how I need to center that as a teacher to challenge that traditional banking model system. And so when I think about, you asked me the question just now, the relationship between teacher and student, my joke with my students is, it's not really a joke at the beginning. I say, traditional teachers are here, traditional students are here. I'm saying this, right?
Yeah, I remember it.
I want us to think about us on an equal playing field. But if you must put a hierarchy, then I want you to think about me below you.
I remember that. Yeah.
Remember that? Yeah, you are I am your servant. You are my boss. And I say this a lot to my students. When you're in this room, you put food on my table and you help me pay for rent. Right. I tell the story about I was at a presentation with the president of the college, and we were up in front of a room with mics. Both of us had mics. They were giving me this Excellence in Teaching Award. I don't care about awards, but this one's from students. I care deeply about that one.
I see.
She was presenting and giving me the award, and she said, "Jeff, how do you feel that your boss," she was talking about herself, this is the president of the college, right? And I turned to her in the presentation in front of like 200 people, and I'm like, "You're not my boss." And she was like, president of our college. She's like, what? And I was like, you're not my boss. My students are my boss. Now, I can't do my work without you. You make this possible, but my ultimate authority is each and every one of my students, right? And so when I think about the humility that I need to bring into the classroom to really center that idea, that's the relationship that I want to build with my students.
I see.
It is my job to get to know you and to understand your needs, and then it's my job to develop a relationship with you and to be in dialogue, to be able to talk with you and ask you questions and really center that relationship. Because if I'm not allowing you to bring your full self into our classroom, then we're not going to be able to do the type of hard work that deep learning requires, right? Yeah, so
I see. That's also kind of related to the mindset you did talk about, like in the last question. Like you want the students to push themselves, not let the teacher push them.
Yeah, and that's related to the book Peak by Anders Ericsson, the Talent Code by Daniel Coyle, the Little Book of Talent by Daniel Coyle, the Talent is Overrated by Jeff Cloven, Deep Work by Cal Newport. There, one of the things that I've done in my free time is study talent acquisition and expertise. And one of the funny things about expertise is that it depends on the ability to do sweet spot learning. You can't just stay the same. You've got to push yourself into spaces, but that can be really, really hard and scary. And my joke about this is that the traditional grading structures and traditional systems in education make students feel threatened, right? We don't. What do we do when you fuck up on a test? What do we do to students? Yeah, this is the equivalent. Like we want to train Steph Curry, early Steph Curry, the guy from the Warriors, right? And every time he misses a 3-pointer, we charge him $100. That is a great way to ruin a basketball player, right? What if you look at athletics, they have a lot of really great lessons. When he misses a 3-point, the first thing you do is get corrective feedback. He tries again, etc. But that depends on the ability to feel safe. And so that's when I'm trying to develop a relationship with my students. You all can push yourselves way harder than I can ever push you. So what I need to do is get out of your way, help create structures that, one, center that drive for excellence, and two, empower you to do the type of deep learning that is required to really develop expertise, right?
Yeah, it's impressive. And also, so the next question would be, since you have adopted a very novel and unique teaching style, and so what have you learned and try to improve this teaching style and like try to improve your teaching quality?
I'm happy to answer that. Maybe you want to say a few words, because this is not only the interview for your paper, but there's people that might watch this about. What my class is like, and I know what my class is like, but others. You want to just say a little bit about what you thought was novel in the classroom, some of the stuff that came up for you?
I would say, like, we don't have like traditional like homeworks. Like usually we just like you assign homeworks, but we don't force us to do it. Like we have our own time management. We can do things in our own space, in our own like we can take our time and do things on our own like pace. And so it's basically more about like focusing on your own learning progress. You don't have to compare with other people. And you don't like get traditional grading where like you get points off, you get like gradings and stuff. You get you just prove yourself that why you're worth the grade that you want. It's more about like you pushing yourself forward, not like being pushed by other people or like being compared to other people. Like that's also some type of like push, like being compared to like your peers. So we don't have all of this. Like you just learn in your own pace. That's what I feel like. That feels good. So
and you deserve that, right? And so the one of the non-traditional approaches is that I invite you to give your own grade. And I always tell my students, if you ask me, I think you should give yourself an A. I do protect against fraud, so I do make sure that my students are making progress, and I have a bunch of checks. I have a lot online about this, so if people who are interested in learning more about this. So anyways, those are some of and I use a flipped classroom and videos, and I post all my stuff, et cetera. So there's a lot of stuff that we do that's non-traditional. So given that context, would you ask your question again, just so student, because they might not know about that, right? So what's your question?
So the question is, since you have adopted a very like novel and unique teaching style, what have you tried to learn and to improve your teaching quality and your teaching style?
Yeah, so one thing that I'll say, this goes back to my time at UC Davis. I was part of a teaching consultant program. It was called the TA, Teaching Assistant Consultant Program. And I think I did that for 2 years, and I did many, many consultations where I actually would go into teachers, I'd watch them. We do 3 different types of consultation. We do video stuff, we do mid-quarter interviews, and we do student interviews. So in that role, I learned a lot about teaching. And one of the things that I learned was to do what was called a quality control survey. And you actually did this. You remember your self-evaluation? Yeah. So what you might not know, Clark, is that since about 2010, I have run those surveys in every single one of my classes.
I see.
And then when I get the results, I study those results very deeply. And then I change my teaching practices based on that. So much of, which means that every student has input to the way that I teach every single quarter. Some of the projects are very, very hard. Many years ago, students talked about how hard it was to follow a long lecture. Students had said, when I asked them about the questions about videos, they said, hey, you should consider videos. That project took like 10 years. That's a very hard project.
Yeah, that's like a lot of work.
Yes. And then, grading, students didn't realize that we could do what we do in grading, and a lot of teachers don't either. I think there's some good reading to have there. But the point is, when you're asking me probably the most important teaching habit for improvement that I use, it is summed up in my motto, which is I suck today, but a little less than yesterday. So I approach my teaching with humility. What I am today is not what you deserve as my student. So I want the world for my student. I want you to have free tuition. I want to be able to pay your rent money. I want to be able to pay your stipend money. I want to be able to, give you the world in your education, because the more educated you are, the stronger we are as a nation and as a world. And when we invest in the youth, we actually create strength. So, and then there's a bunch of stuff in, I want you to be able to do projects that you care about. I want you to do applied learning. I want you to take ownership of your learning. I don't ever want you to take a class that's required. I want you to decide what you want to learn, right? Those are all things that I want for you, but a lot of those are systemic. So when you come into my class, we are constrained by the reality of our system as is. So when I say I suck today, what it means is what you deserve is not what I'm going to give you. So there's a lot more work that I have to do in my career to get better every day. But then the second part of that, the motto is, I suck today, but I'm a little better than yesterday. And that's the idea that I'm committed to routine improvement. And so, one thing that I make a commitment to myself, and then I live that commitment with my students, is every single quarter, I'm going to get to know you. I'm going to ask you questions about your experience. And then I'm going to listen very carefully to the things that you tell me, and then go get educated and make changes. And I guess so that's one thing, like bring students in as my teaching partners. So you're actually teaching me what I need to do better. And then the other thing, of course, is that I am an avid reader. I think a lot about, I think so much of our education system is not based on deep thought or research. It's based on pack practice. It reminds me of racism, right? Racism is a system of oppression that is passed down through generations without much critical thought, right? There's no science behind it. It's just literally, this is what my parents told me, and so I'm going to believe this. And the same thing's true with teaching. So much of what we do in classroom has nothing to do with the research on learning, the psychology of learning, the psychology of, the cognitive science, the development of expertise. So much of teaching is, this is what my teachers did to me. I did well, so I'm going to do it to you. And when somebody like me challenges that system, I'm challenging 400 years of practice. If I do it without covering my basis, then people can attack me. And so one of the things that I felt very strongly, in addition to bringing my students in to my teaching practices, I want to get educated, and I want to be able to map every single teaching decision that I make in the classroom back to research that I can actually point to, so that any naysayer who says you're not doing your job, I can say back, read these 70 books, go think about it, and then when you're done with that, come talk with me. Because until you do that, many naysayers are not invested in systemic change. They just don't want to do the hard work that this requires because they're not supported to do it, right? I've done that work. I've actually done a ton, way more than I'm paid for, to be able to make sure that the decisions that I'm making in my classes do 2 things. Number one, they align with research principles in the science of expertise and the science of learning and cognitive science and the psychology of what it means to build deep expertise in the field. and anti-racism. I
Yeah.
brought a lot of anti-racism into this because I think it's really important to challenge those systems of oppression that keep a small fraction of people very rich and the rest of us not so rich. And then the second thing is to make sure that the work that I do aligns with my ultimate authority. This is my students, right? So that as I'm doing my work, my students are part of how I, the ultimate question that I need to ask myself is, am I effective as helping students learn deeply? Do I help propel students to do things in my classes that, one, mean a lot to them while we're working together, and two, sustain for many, many, many years after we work together, right? And I would ask you, how have I done on that so far for you?
I would say, yeah, that's pretty impressive. Like you've been like very dedicated, like in the work, in your work, in your class. Like you definitely do like way more than you deserve. Like you should, like you, they expect you to do, I would say.
Here's another way that I would ask that question. What, if anything, have you continued to do? We work together really hard on your portfolio and on learning skills. Which of those have you continued to work on and develop that you first started developing in our class together? Do you have any of those?
So time management, I would say. That's absolutely a big part that I get like from the class. So I'm still like doing time like calendar, like to like plan all my things in the week, like details. And yeah, that's like I would say that actually helped me a lot, especially like when I'm using like a lot of stuff like coming out, like a lot of classes, researches stuff. So yeah, that actually like helped me a lot. I would say I appreciate that part the most. And also the like the mindset. Yeah. Like you should push yourself, not let other people to push you. You should have your own pace to learn. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot though.
Yeah, so you're noticing right there that one of my favorite things when you tell me I'm fired, I get really excited.
I see.
I couldn't say, because what you just said is that was not me doing that to you. That was I created an environment that allowed you to develop new skills that you took ownership of. And I have no authority over you. I have, like, you're gone from the process, and yet still the work that we did together makes a difference. And I would ask you, are those habits that you've developed that we worked on together, do you feel they're contributing to the work that you're doing at Davis?
Yeah, sure. Like, of course. Like every single day.
Right. So yeah, every day, every moment, right? Like there's so many stories of students, and this is why I got into this job. If I was a billionaire, I would do a lot of things and I would still be teaching. I would still be in this fucking room. And I'd pay for your tuition. I would create a lobbying arm to like go to our state and national government to make college free, because I believe that when we do that type of transformational work, we unlock parts of your capacity that allow you to do really creative and deep work. And when that happens, you bring that back into your family. You bring it into your local communities. You bring it into the job, which means that you're bringing the power that you create in your education to solve problems in your local communities that you care about. And that's a mechanism by which we rise by lifting others. And so when I think about my job as a teacher, that's, you are living proof out loud of exactly what I try to work for, which is every single student, I want to create an experience with you that you hold on to years after you've met me, and it helps propel you in ways that if you never met me, you would not have been propelled, right? I don't control that. Only my students control that, but it's something that I think about every day of my life. And the fun thing is, when you ask me about what I'm learning and how I do it, the more skilled I've become, the more this happens for almost all of my students. So I always like to say, the traditional narrative is when a student fails, it's the student fault. When one of my students fails, that's my fault. I believe that. If a student of mine fails, if I fail to get to this level where you're developing, not only are you mastering the content that we study together to the best of your ability and creating resources, et cetera, but you're also developing transferable learning skills, right? It goes back to that diagram, right? What you're saying to me right now is, Jeff, you helped me develop strategic deep, you did all the hard work, right? I'm a water boy. I bring you water, I clean the toilets, I do the dishes for you, right? You're doing all the hard work. I'm just your cheerleader, right? But, you started to develop strategic deep learning skills. You started to develop belief that perhaps you could do really, really hard things in education. You started to develop a purpose that goes beyond just, I'm going to do this for a grade, right? And what you're noticing is that when you have those things, you can take those into any class or any purpose and learn anything that you need, right?
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
I see. So I'll say another question is, let's talk about your email philosophy, because I saw that on your website that you have like a very different email philosophy. Can you like explain it, and why do you like feel in that way?
Yeah. So yeah, maybe we can just show the little link to this, and I can put it in the description for this. My basic philosophy on email is it's not fair. So on my website, appliedlinearalgebra.com, if you go to the blogs over here, there's my email policy and email philosophy, and you can read those, right?
Yeah.
And the basic thing is I don't want to be responsible for giving back emails. So if my main purpose at Foothill College is to invest in students, and you see how hard I work. I mean, people who are not in my classes don't recognize what I do, but like people in my classes are like, oh my God, I always challenge my students, see if you can outwork me, right? And that's not an easy work, right? Yeah, it's not easy. Like that, I'm a very, very hard worker. But this conversation that we have, I have like I don't know, 12 of these a day. I'm with my students face to face in deep dialogue from the moment I walk on campus to the moment I leave, right? And what happened with email is I find a lot of times email developed in the 1980s, I think, and there was really no protocol. So what people would do is they would have these open loops, and it was a better way than doing mail, right? Because in mail, you actually got to do work. You got to like write the damn thing. You got to put it in an envelope. You got to walk to the post office. So there's a barrier to entry, right? So if somebody's sending you a piece of mail, that's like a really special thing, right? Like that takes actual work. But email doesn't take actual work. You can just send the damn thing, right? And when I first became a professional at UC Davis, when I was like responsible for other people, I noticed that email screws up my day. Like I can't do the type of deep work that I need to do. People are asking me stuff and not very thoughtful in how they ask it, right? So you'll get I'll get a block of text, and like embedded in the third paragraph, sentence 2 is this ask, and I got to like read the whole thing and figure out what the ask is. And eventually I realized that if I'm serious about doing the type of work that needs to be done, right? I've created an entire YouTube site. I've written 2 textbook manuscripts. I provide all of my stuff for free, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of stuff that I do for my students, all of which requires hundreds, thousands of hours, right? So if I commit to answering email, I'm gonna basically serving, I have 100 students per quarter, 120 students per quarter, quarters a year. That's 300 to 360 students, and then I work with 500 colleagues, right? So if we just looked at email on a daily basis, this was just me trying to be a good worker. Let's just look at email today. Let's just actually take a look at this, right? Let's look at what my email looks like today. So, all right. So
yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah. So, and then let's look at yesterday. Right? It's just not like, this is not fair. I think there's some good books on this. Cal Newport wrote he's writing a book on email. I don't know if he's finished this. Years before I saw Cal Newport, I got Donald Knuth had a really good one. So as a knowledge professional, this is going to be a problem you need to solve eventually. How do you manage email? And one of the benefits of my community college teaching job is I have a union and we have a contract, and nowhere in the contract does it say that I have to answer emails.
I see.
Not a single place. So I'm doing this work for free, and I'm happy to do it, but I am not going to do work for somebody that's not thoughtful about how I do my job, right? I put so much love. I pour my whole blood and soul into my students. And there are a lot of emails that I get that don't center that relationship. And so what I've learned is that in order to do the type of deep work that I want to do, I need hours of uninterrupted stuff. And years ago, a dear colleague of mine and somebody that I trust, Sarah Williams, she said, I love your email policy, but you should publish that, right? And so that document is a demonstration, right?
I see.
One thing that I think we should say is for my students, one of my students taught me how to use Google Voice. So the first, I'm now fully running on this. I think we did it when we met each other.
Yeah.
That's key, right? So I do believe that students deserve my attention. And for all of my students, I send you a text within the first week of knowing you, and then text back and forth all quarter. And you can text me 24 hours, 365, 7 days a week. And for projects that I care about, I am attending to email. I'm not going to hold myself open to say I'm going to respond to all everybody, anybody, and anybody.
Yeah, because that's a lot of work.
It's not fair to me, and it's not fair to my students. If I hold myself open to that, the experiences that my students have in my classes are going to be way diminished, because the amount of energy and love and care that I bring into my face-to-face interactions with students is very, very high. Requires a lot of planning in the back end. And if I'm spending that planning time on emails, that means that that's not getting done, which means that the experience that you have is much less. So I actually believe that the email policy that I've created actually contributes to the type of learning outcomes that you've achieved in that class. They are not separate. This is a mechanism.
I see.
Yeah, I'm a working professional, and I do very, very good work, I believe. In order to do that work, I need to be paid for it. And email is a mechanism of taking my time and so that the basic idea, I can link to the email policy here. You've read it before, etc.
Yeah, I feel. Oh, I just kind of want another question. So do you feel like the traditional type of teaching is like a way to promote racism?
In the United States, the history of white supremacy is real, and I never understand why folks are scared to talk. I mean, I do understand why. I've read a lot about racism, and a lot, I think one of the best things that I can do for myself is read about racism, read books about it, and get educated about it. The basic concept of racism is a mechanism by which very, very rich people maintain power, right? And this is actually all oppression, right? Like, it's not just racism. You could say the same thing for sexism. You could say the same thing for ageism or ableism. The idea of oppression is that one group of people is better than another group of people, or a certain group projects ignorance and inability onto another group that is not based in reality, right? But if I think about the systemic pressures behind why that exists, think about white people in early America. Plantations, the number of plantation owners was not really, really high. It was certainly not equal to the number of white people. So there were a ton of white people, Black people that we had basically robbed from their home and under labor with fear of death, right? So if you look at that hierarchy, the plantation owner benefits from the entire hierarchy. They're the person that gets all the riches. They're the person that gets all the goods. The white overseers, the white townspeople, actually have a lot more in common with the slaves, the Black slaves, than they do with the plantation owner, right? Because imagine that all of those people got armed and killed the plantation owner, and then just cut up the land and worked it themselves. Bar none, those white townspeople would be in a better position because they'd have their own land, they'd have their own farms, etc., right? And the plantation owner realizes that. The plantation owner realizes that he is stealing wealth from the white townspeople, and also using mechanisms of violence and death to keep Black slaves in line. So he needs a justification. He needs to be able to say, don't focus on me and my riches. Take all that anger that you have and place it downwards. And so what he does is he creates a justification, right? He says, hey, white people, look at what the Black people's life is like, and look at how good your life is compared to them, right? And you have I'm going to give you all this power. I'm going to give you the ability to inflict violence and death. And we'll talk about that violence and death in terms of animals, right? So we'll dehumanize the recipients of that violence and death, the survivors, the victims, right? And that will justify the fact that you're doing this to another human, all the while taking your focus away from solidarity, right? Away from revolution that could overthrow this power structure, and keeping you in line, right? And that will continue to allow riches to go up to me, right? So, Ibram X. Kendi's Stamped from the Beginning, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Those are both great books. The book by Robin DiAngelo, which is White Literacy, I think it is, White Racial Literacy. The book Caste by Isabella Wilkerson. The book The Sum of Us by Heather McGhee. These are, I can keep going for a long time. I've read many subject, right? The point is that in order to get educated, I had to actually be able to see that, right, and recognize that, you know, so much oppression is based on designing income inequality, right? So that a very, very small number of extremely wealthy people continue to hold power in our society, where the rest of us fight against each other, rather than recognizing most of us have more in common with each other than we do with those rich people. And if we acted in solidarity, we could actually go up and challenge that. And so when we talk about the education system, you know, very, very wealthy people in our society don't really have an interest in good education, because if you're educated and I'm educated and the society is educated, you know what we're going to start doing? We're going to start thinking, you know, maybe I don't want to buy those products. Maybe that I don't want that particular law to be passed, right? Maybe I don't want the fact that, you know, ALEC, American Legislative Executive Council. This is a group of business people that buy lawyers to write laws that literally are given to legislators, and then they just vote on those legislation, right? So it's literally business people buying laws. Can you buy a law? Can you go and buy a law in your country? Yeah, I can't either, right? And if we get educated on that and we start thinking about that and we start being realized about that, we might not like that. And in a democracy, in a governmental system where people have power, we could vote for laws that undermine the power of very rich people. So for example, Jeff Bezos, I think, how many yachts do you need to be happy, right? How many yachts do you need? Is it 4? Is it 8? The reality is he probably would be in a great position with $150 million, or I don't know, $500 million. I don't know what the cap is, but at some level, like, that other money that he has could be redistributed to the rest of society. And that's actually been a 50-year push. And so when you ask me about racism in education, this actually gets into systemic inequality. It's one of the reasons that I took this job rather than another job, because I'm investing in students. And when I invest in students, we can get educated together. But the point of the matter is, so much of our education system is not designed for learning. It's designed for maintaining the status quo. It's designed for what I would call domination and control. And a great example of this is the student to teacher ratio. Teachers are expensive. And if we do our work well, teachers are transgressive, because teachers care about students. My job as a teacher is not to protect the US government, though I do believe very deeply in that structure, and I fight for it every day. My job is not to protect companies and to protect income flows. My job is to invest in you. My job is to make you the most powerful and most capable and most educated person that you can be. When I do that well, that causes, you know, power to the people. Education is freedom. That's what that shirt says, right? Education. People who make policy know that. Business owners know that. So, you know, if you can attack education systems and decrease the number of teachers in a system so that more students happen per teachers, that system actually won't do deep learning. The system will basically turn learning into a product. It's no longer a process, it's a product, right? So the job of the system is to put stamps on students, right? A, B, F, right? And so that goes back into that, right? When I think about the history of racism, there's a reason why slave owners didn't want their slaves to read. There's a reason why that's true, because if slaves could read, they could start to develop their own ideas. They could start to. They couldn't just do things or they could do more than just word of mouth, right? And so when you're asking me about how racist policies show up in education, I can go through a whole litany. I'm not a scholar in this field, so I wouldn't say I'm the person to ask about in this. I would point you to a bunch of books, but I have read those books, and I'm conscious of that, and I see that systemic legacy in our education system. And I think it's so important for educators to take that. This is one of the reasons that I wanted to be at the community college. If I'm at the UC teaching, so much of my work is involved with publications, publishing for a very elite group of scholars. And that means that I'm not spending my time getting educated about the policy infrastructure that undergirds education, and also about the structures of how learning works. And it always makes me laugh, right? Like you have these people that are publishing papers that are read by maybe 100 people, and then they have like 800 people in their classes, right? So, and
I
they're
see.
avoiding the work that's good for those 800 people so that they can
Mhm.
be famous in a group of like 300 people, right? And
I see.
the more famous they are, the more big companies like that, right?
Yeah.
Companies like Amazon and Google, they love scholars. And so what they'll do is they'll fund their education, they'll fund that, right? And
Mhm.
there's just so much in that system that I think
I see.
can be improved, right? And I actually think that we as a nation suffer because of this structure. We do not realize all the things that we could. I actually think our GDP is much lower than it could be. If we had
I
really,
see.
really strong math and engineering education that welcomed all people in, we could do so much more than we're doing now, right? A great book on this is Talking About Leaving Revisited by
Mhm.
I forget her name right now, but it's fantastic. It documents some of the problems that we have in
I
STEM
see.
education. Yeah. So, anyways, that's a very, very long conversation, but
Yeah, I see.
that
That's very
history,
impressive too. Mhm.
I think it's important because
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
legacy of racism, and really what that means is income inequality, right? Racism is a
Mhm.
justification for using violence and
I see.
systemic pressure to allow a very, very small group of people to maintain
Mhm.
power and
Mhm.
control over a large group of people, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
in my heart, white workers have a lot more in common with our Black and brown brothers and sisters than we do with people who own businesses, right? And
Mhm.
we would be much better if we stopped fighting with each other and we started to
Mhm.
think critically about the structures that we have. And that's when I create educational structures, I think a lot about that: education towards liberation, education towards empowerment, education towards transformation, right? And
Mhm.
so, and if I'm not thinking about that, it means that I'm not actually fulfilling my duty to my ultimate boss, which is my
Yeah. I
yeah.
see. Okay. Next question is a bit more like personal. So what's your plan like for the future? Like what do you plan to do in the future? Do you plan to like continue to contribute to your educational pursuit?
Oh man, I got so many plans in the future. I
Can name a few?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm one project that I work on consistently. This is just fun for young students. This is what I'd say to all my students: is learn how to read. So, this is this is a low level plan because I do this anyways. But like, you can always get my reading lists.
Mhm.
I plan to read till I die. This year I'm on like 22 books. Every year I
Mhm.
want to do something like a minimum of 24 books plus change. So I will continue to read until I'm 6 feet under, which is exciting.
Uh-huh.
Most important, like on my mind right now, is I want to continue to build out my YouTube and blog channels. I'm going to be building out my Math 2B stuff. So I have an entire textbook that I want to build in that, and I want to get through. So I actually want 4 math linear algebra classes: matrix
Mhm.
multiplication, linear systems, least squares, and eigenvalues. I want them all to be
Mhm.
project based. I want to bring in computation and coding in those classes.
Mhm.
And so I'm going to be continue to work on that so that I have a 1,000-page textbook, all supported by videos with projects, right? And I'm going to bring students into that so that students can design their own projects. And that's a major thing that I'm working on. The same thing's true with the
Mhm.
engineering MATLAB class. Um, and then there's some sub projects in that. Like I think very seriously about the idea that if we're serious about doing work in mathematics, we should help you build transferable skills so that you're
Mhm.
not just learning the math, that you're actually doing applied projects that relate to your career interests. And so in addition, the nice thing about the video and textbook project is there's 2 modalities. So students who want to watch videos, they can watch videos. Students who want to read textbooks can read textbooks. You have available for free, so there's no barrier to entry there. And then in class, instead of doing the standard thing where I'm testing you or I'm talking at you, you could start working on projects that are directly related to your future. So for computer science, we could do machine learning, we could do graphics, we could do a ton of different things that
Mhm.
involve linear algebra and that relate to your majors, so that you're actually building skills that
Mhm.
relate to the type of work that you want to do in the future. And this would solve the pipeline problem. Like by the time you graduate, my claim is I have evidence on YouTube videos of students that get hired at
Mhm.
local engineering companies based on the work they did
Uh-huh.
in the 2B class. I
I
have students
see.
that do research
Mhm.
experience for undergraduates. I have students that go on to do PhDs. I have students to publish. Like, so much of this work can travel from your education. So I always call this from the classroom to the bank, right? So
Mhm.
how do you transition from the work that you do in the
Uh-huh.
classroom into a paycheck?
Uh-huh.
And I think it's really important. I am very, very I feel strongly that I want to continue to build systems. What you're seeing is
Mhm.
10 years of work. and really
I
only
see.
like
Yeah.
6 years
Uh-huh.
of work because the first 4 years I was in the 10-year
Uh-huh.
process.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
you were in my class, you saw about 6 years of work. So imagine what I could do with another 30.
Yeah, like 30 years already. That's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah,
They'll be
so
like saying,
so I'm excited about that. Some of my students are trying to convince me to go for 1 million subscribers. I'm agnostic about that right now because
uh-huh.
my ultimate goal, I'm not trying to be famous. What I want to do is invest in you, but I do recognize that there are some systemic powers. I love the idea of taking money from other places in the country and channeling that into my students. And I also love the idea that I serve less people. I would love to get to a place where I'm only teaching 2 classes in fall, 2 classes in winter, and then I spend the entire spring and summer developing all of the content, because I can't do I for about 7 years. I woke up at 3:30 a.m. I'd start working at 4, and then I'd work till 6:30 till my kids get up. From 6:30 to 8, I'd make sure that everything was good. Then I'd go to work at 8. I'd work until 5:30. Then I'd put my kids down and then recycle, and I do that 6 or 7 days a week.
I
Last
see.
year, I had heart pressure. I had chest pain because of lack of sleep and just the amount of love that I pour in. There's some stress associated with that. And so I'm realigning my life so that I can really take care of my body and I can take
I
care of
see. Yeah,
it.
yeah.
And so
Mhm.
when I think about the next stage of my career, my question is, how can I actually start to get paid for the work that I do? Because I've done so much of this for free.
Mhm.
But like
Mhm.
I believe that my students deserve my full attention during daylight hours, and that I don't want to die. Like I don't want to have a heart attack because of overwork.
Uh-huh.
And so the next phase of my career is going to be building the infrastructure so that I can decrease the number of students that I serve. When I serve less student, that means every student that I serve gets more
Yeah,
of
yeah,
my
yeah.
attention, more of my love, and I can do more
Mhm.
creative work. I can create projects that they'll allow
Mhm.
students to do some really, really powerful stuff, right? And so that's, the blogs, the YouTube, and some of the,
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I see why. Mhm.
yeah.
Okay. So lastly, would you like to give other students or teachers one piece of advice?
Don't trust me. I'm full of shit.
Okay.
Yeah. So get educated. Do your own reading. Like the more I have a lot of solutions to problems that we have for myself. I've spent
Uh-huh.
15
I
years
see.
reading about this. But the reason that I had those solutions was because I've done so much reading and thinking and developing. I treated this as a research project, just like I would treat a PhD research project.
Mhm.
I've been reading academically and I've been iterating, right? And so what I would say is read, just become a
Mhm.
voracious reader, and do so for yourself, not because an authority figure is telling you, but because you find something you're genuinely interested in and then become really educated in that. And for teachers, I would say I have a lot of stuff online available. I will continue to produce
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
there for you. So for students and learners, anybody that learns, develop reading systems, period. Just become voracious readers where you're developing the skills that are important to you and not trusting the system. So in my graduate degree, I got like a master's or PhD in cognitive science in my free time. I read
Mhm.
extensively in education, and I didn't tell the mathematicians up there one bit about that, because if I said it, they wouldn't take me seriously as a mathematician. So I had to do that in my private time. And the same thing, I've done that. I read 24 books in my free time per year at least, right? Because I know that the skills that I need are not equal to what my job works. So with students, I mean, how many times I talk about reading books, right? Read books,
Yeah,
read
yeah, a lot. Yeah.
all the time. I want you all to, because no school, I always like to say, what happens when you graduate from UC Davis and you're unemployed? You think Davis is going to give you back your tuition? Nope.
Mhm.
So
Nope.
no school is fully invested in your success, and the number of things that you need in order to thrive is much higher than the amount of content that is given in your required class list, right? And so when you learn to read, what you're doing is you're giving yourself better information to make better decisions. And the same thing's true with teaching. Most college teachers are not trained as teachers. They're
Mhm.
trained as content experts, and they know nothing about education, and the system does not support good teaching in that way. So when we read, when we get educated, we flip the power dynamics, because we start to tap into research-based ideas and solutions and techniques that if we're not exposed to that. Yeah. And then the other thing is trust your students, right? As teachers, like
Mhm.
bring your students in as learning partners, really ask them, do your quality control surveys. It sounds like I need
Mhm.
to write a few blog posts on that.
Mhm.
Because when we learn from students know what they need, and that, the most,
Mhm.
Clark, you are the world's leading expert on your own learning needs. There's no one in the world that can tell you more about your own learning needs than you,
Mhm.
right? And so when I, as a teacher, ask you questions about how I can be better for you, I collect really, really valuable informations about the
I
things that
see.
I can do to change myself. And so that's, those are my pieces of information. Read like a fiend, get really excited about it, build systems to be able to read voraciously and really take that seriously, and then develop relationships, really positive working relationships with the people that you care
Mhm.
most about, and bring them into the process of improving yourself and improving the work that you do for the communities that you care most about, right?
I see. Okay, thanks. I think this is it for interview. It's really like impressive and like such an insane interview. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Clark. I keep doing what you're doing, man. I wish you the best of the best. I'll be in
I
contact.
see.